Hello, my name is Paul McLaughlin, and I worked at the Atlantic Gelatin Company from 1953 to 1992. It is my pleasure to represent the thousands of men and women who played a part in the 97-year history and success of the Atlantic Gelatin, affectionately known as the Jelly. This film is dedicated to them.
As Woburn grew and prospered during the 1800s, farms and tanneries provided most of the opportunities for employment. At the end of World War I in 1919, a new industry emerged that not only provided employment with steady pay, but would soon offer pension plans and medical insurance, providing stability and enhancing the lives of thousands of middle-class families in Woburn, as well as our neighbors in Stoneham and Winchester. The Atlantic Gelatin Company, or more affectionately known as the Jelly, became a manufacturing giant. Producing gelatin proved to be a true partner in the development of Woburn's economic growth. While gelatin was not a new product, its expanding uses created demand worldwide. The Atlantic Gelatin General Foods plant would go on to develop three major operations: gelatin, flavoring components, and byproducts. Joseph H. Cohen, founder of the Atlantic Gelatin Company, whose life story could have been titled The American Dream, was born in Lithuania, Russia in 1890. He was the youngest of 13 children, and in 1895, Joseph and the Yomtov family emigrated to the United States. Upon their arrival, his new last name would now become Cohen. Settling in the West End of Boston, Joseph sold newspapers in grammar school, and continued through his teenage years while attending English high school. Upon graduation, he attended the Massachusetts Institute of Technology on full scholarship, majoring in a new course, chemical engineering. Taking a leave of absence from MIT to earn additional money, he worked for the Northwestern Leather Company in Salem, where he learned the leather trade. When he graduated from MIT in 1913, he worked for a short time in a tannery in New Hampshire. Not able to convince local tanners that they needed a chemical engineer, he went to work for the American Glue Company as superintendent of the company's gelatin department. Looking ahead, Cohen felt that there would be more of a future in the gelatin industry than in the glue or leather industries. With his prior work experience and understanding of the similarities between the production of leather and gelatin, he decided to start his own company. It was necessary for him to have money for a factory, materials, and equipment. He was able to enlist the support of 5 important tanners to back him in the endeavor. These tanners shared his belief that gelatin could be made and sold at a price that customers were willing to pay while watching the business grow. These backers were Wyden Lord Tanning Company, Crease and Cook Company, Northwestern Leather Company, Thayer Foss Company, and J.S. Barnett and Sons. According to Joe Cohen, this enterprise took imagination, it took initiative, it took courage, and it took cash. Cohen worked on a proposal to buy the buildings and land of the Bader Adamson Glue Company. With the help of Mayor Bernard J. Golden and Daniel P. O'Brien of the Woburn Machine Company, the largest machine company in Woburn. Together they acquired 84 acres of land, located on the Woburn-Stoneham line, which gave them access to water and the railroad shipping tracks. An agreement was reached with the 5 tannery owners on September 29, 1919. The Atlantic Gelatin Company broke ground for the construction of a new plant, office, and laboratories in October. The construction was completed in January 1920. They were now open for business. The president of the company would be Peter Wyden, one of the investing tanners. He was the owner of many tanneries in the area, including the Wyden Lord Tanning Company in Woburn. Joseph Cohen would be named general manager. They would also need experienced workers. Many would come from the local tannery business. One of the first employees they would hire was Nils Hultgren, who worked for Andrew Peterson Tannery in North Woburn. Hultgren began working for Atlantic Gelatin in 1920, and he would work his way up to be superintendent. He held that position until his retirement in 1959. Interestingly, he and his family lived on the site at 23 Hill Street. His 3 children remember those days fondly growing up roaming their huge backyard at the Atlantic Gelatin. The problems of production and quality were great at first, but Cohen persevered, and the company broke even in their first year with production capacity at 1 million pounds. As good fortune would have it, the Atlantic Gelatin would sign a contract with Genesee Pure Food Company of Leroy, New York on November 10, 1922, calling for them to deliver a total of 3 million pounds of gelatin over the course of the next 3 years at a cost of 35 cents per pound, becoming their first major customer. Genesee Pure Foods, who owned the Jell-o product since 1900, launched a sizable advertising campaign to promote Jell-o. This campaign brought them great success, and Jell-o very quickly became America's most famous dessert and a household word. In 1923, Genesee Pure Foods Company was reorganized as the Jell-o Company, and in 1925, the Jell-o Company was sold to Postum Cereal Company of Battle Creek, Michigan. This merger resulted in the creation of General Foods Company in 1929. With the Jell-o dessert so successful, it created a greater demand for gelatin. General Foods made the decision to purchase the Atlantic Gelatin Company in 1930 for $814,000, guaranteeing their supply of gelatin for General Foods Jell-o. Atlantic Gelatin would now be known as Atlantic Gelatin, division of General Foods Corporation. During the Depression era in the 1930s, various industries, especially local tanneries, were slowing down production. With the local high unemployment, the Atlantic Gelatin still offered steady work and operated the plant on a 24-hour basis right up until the dawn of World War II. With the onset of World War II in 1941, the Atlantic Gelatin was still able to meet the demands for Jell-o and minute gelatin, in spite of its serious loss in personnel to the armed forces and the increasing difficulty of obtaining raw materials created by the war. They were also handling the demand for gelatin by many food industries as well as the pharmaceutical industry, where gelatin was being used extensively for vitamin and other gelatin capsule preparations, with most of this material going to our military and allies. The demand for photographic gelatin had also increased. Aerial photography represented the eyes of the military, and it was extremely helpful in achieving victory in the war effort. New uses for the byproducts of gelatin were the large quantities of grease that would be used in manufacturing of grade 2 oil, soaps, and explosives, also used by the military. Since many of Atlantic Gelatin's personnel were in the younger age group in 1943, 92 out of a total of 250 employees, or 37% of its workforce, had been inducted into the military. This created a serious manpower problem that was met by the employment of boys between the ages of 16 to 18, and for the first time, the employment of women, who would work in the factory by late July of 1943. By the end of the war, over 110 Atlantic Gelatin employees would serve in the military. In 1946, H Cohen and his staff would begin honoring the achievements of his longtime employees who participated in the growth and development of Atlantic Gelatin since its beginning in 1920. These newly formed service award receptions were often held at the Belmont Country Club. These men and women were the backbone that made the Atlantic Gelatin successful, and probably gave it the nickname the Jelly. In this same spirit of service and recognition, on Memorial Day in 1948, a memorial was placed on the grounds at the Atlantic Gelatin that honored all employees who had served in World War II, with special dedication to the memory of 4 deceased employees who made the supreme sacrifice. First Lieutenant Edward C. Walsh of Brookline was in the Army Air Corps. He went missing in action in Germany on September 11, 1945. Private James J. Gannon of Everett served in the Army. He was killed in action in Italy on March 9, 1944. Corporal Patrick Rosilio of Woburn was employed as a chemist in the laboratories of the Atlantic Gelatin before being assigned to the Medical Corps as a corporal in the Army. He was killed in action on July 31, 1944 at St. Lo, France, while carrying a litter to pick up other wounded men. He was the recipient of the Purple Heart. Private John H. Began of Woburn worked at the Atlantic Gelatin until he enlisted in the Marines. He fought on Saipan and Iwo Jima, where he died on March 18, 1945, as a result of his bullet wounds. He was awarded the Purple Heart and the Asiatic Pacific Medal. Edward Callahan and Eugene Sweeney, two of the first employees to respond to the call of World War II, unveiled the memorial. A crowd of over 400 people came to the plant for the ceremony that included family members and local dignitaries. In the 1950s, veterans were returning from World War II and the Korean War, and during this post-war economic boom, men and women were looking for jobs that offered good wages, job security, and benefits. The jelly was one of the industries in Woburn that offered this opportunity and would see its workforce rise to over 500. Many would find work in the vat room, shipping room, office, laboratories, and maintenance department. Generations of families would work at the jelly. Families like the Mengeles and Solares of Stoneham. Joe Cohen stated, "An organization like Atlantic Gelatin is not an impersonal, abstract institution. On the contrary, it is a very live, human, throbbing enterprise. It is like a large family. The welfare of the whole is reflected in the welfare of each individual member." He would make sure the employees would enjoy the Christmas parties, continued service awards, outings, and even offered employees and their families vacation at the Ranch in Orange, Mass., where they could rent General Foods-owned cabins for summer vacations. Joseph Cohen would emphasize the importance of a family atmosphere, creating the first newsletter called At Gel Topics in 1952. This became a vehicle to communicate with his employees about the state of the company, employee activities, and announcements. The first Family Day was held in October 1952, when over 600 Atlantic Gelatin family members would be part of the first plant tour. At this time, we see the formation of bowling teams, softball and golf leagues, but one of the most important organizations that would be founded was the At Gel Credit Union, with Larry Orsillo as the first president. Many jelly families would come to rely on this credit union for many years to come. Joe Cohen's objective was to make the Atlantic Gelatin a good place to work, a safe place to work, and a secure place to work.
All right now, boys, how about a little dinner music?
Okay, Dave, what'll we sing? How about lamb chop hot? I like the hot potato polka. I want lima bean blues.
Don't be silly. We're going to sing the What's for Dessert Jell-o song. Ready, Theodore?
Ready?
Simon?
Ready.
Alvin? Alvin?
Ready, and here's the Jell-o.
Alvin, over there. All right. 1, 2.
Jell-o, Jell-o, time for fun. Lots of fun for everyone. Wiggle, wobble, shiny bright. Let's have Jell-o every night.
Alvin!
Jell-o, Jell-o tastes so nice. Soft and sweet and cool as ice.
Alvin!
Okay! Jell-o's fun and Jell-o's gay. Eat Jell-o every day. Jell-O.
Many people ask, what is Jell-o made from? The answer? Pigskins and tanner stock. Jell-o is a brand name, and gelatin is the important ingredient in Jell-o. The gelatin in Jell-o is produced from the collagen protein from pigskins and cattle hide trimmings. Tanneries and meat packers in the U.S. and abroad were the chief sources for the raw material that supplied Atlantic Gelatin. The gelatin made at Atlantic Gelatin had many varied uses that fall into 4 categories: edible, pharmaceutical, industrial, and photographic. Its greatest use was in the edible category, used by the food industry, where the Atlantic Gelatin plant produced more than 20 million pounds annually for use in Jell-o desserts. Gelatin was also used extensively in the meat, confectionery, and baking industries. The pharmaceutical industry used gelatin to make capsules for medicines and vitamins and as binders for pills. Industrial uses came from the byproducts department, where they collected fats and oils from the gelatin manufacturing process and converted this material for use in products such as high-quality lubricating oils and in antibiotic productions and soap manufacturing. Up until the 1970s, the photographic industry used gelatin and ocene in the preparation of photographic plates, film, and paper. The Atlantic Gelatin Company would continue to grow and prosper from these products for 97 years. The process to produce gelatin in the 1950s from edible frozen pigskins began when the skins arrived by freight cars that ran along the Atlantic Gelatin property. The skins were then moved to the prep area in the vat room to thaw and begin the process to break down the tissue. They were then craned to a chopper where they were cut into manageable pieces, put into the wash mills to soak, and washed with treated diluted chemicals which made the skin swell, making it easier to extract the gelatin. The skins were then conveyed into 5-foot kettles in the cookroom, where the cooking process began with the extraction of collagen from the skins, which turned into a liquid form, producing an average of 3% gelatin. This process allowed the collagen and oils in the skins to be released. The oils were not needed for the gelatin, so the oils were sold as non-edible byproducts to other companies. Once the oils were removed, further steps were taken to purify the gelatin. It was then filtered and evaporated into approximately 20 to 30% gelatin. The now syrup-like solution flowed through dozens of tiny nozzles onto an ice-cold revolving drum, where it congealed prior to going onto continuous dryers. There were 2 different size continuous dryers that would produce a total of 3,000 pounds per hour of gelatin. The number 1 dryer produced 1,000 pounds, and the number 2 dryer produced 2,000 pounds. It took approximately 4 hours to dry gelatin before being sent to bulk handling to be ground and sifted into different specified meshes for each customer's requirements. Before blending, the gelatin was put into drums for quality testing by the lab technicians, checking for the bloom, which is the strength of the gelatin, and mesh per the customer's requirements. It would be tested again before being packaged in drums or 50-pound bags and shipped out to the customer. The process for tanner stock, which is cowhide trimmings, required a different prep treatment. Arriving in freight cars and trucks, they were placed into the vats for 6 to 60 days, depending on the treatment needed. It was a longer treatment process, but once it went into the wash mills, it continued the same process as pigskins to produce gelatin. This production process would remain essentially the same over the years, with improvements due to automation and modernization helping to increase the plant's productivity. The Atlantic Gelatin was the only General Foods plant that did not make a finished product. They supplied other General Foods plants around the country with gelatin used to make various General Foods products that included Jell-o desserts. They also sold to other industries. In 1954, new and improved uses for gelatin were being developed, which increased production, making the Atlantic Gelatin Company the largest gelatin manufacturer in the world. producing over 22 million pounds per year. Joseph Cohen stated in 1954, "It may be well said that the development of the gelatin industry in the U.S. has paralleled the remarkable growth of our country as a whole, and that Woburn has contributed toward this achievement more than any other American community. Woburn was, in fact, the logical place for a successful gelatin company because it was for many years the world's largest hide and leather center, and therefore a great source of supply of raw materials for the production of gelatin. Massachusetts was the gelatin capital of the world." The jelly celebrated its 35th birthday in 1954 with a large open house where Joe Cohen welcomed employees and their families, customers, suppliers, local officials, and the general public. It was a community celebration proudly showing their accomplishments over the last 35 years. The festivities included tours of the plant, exhibits and offices, with refreshments served at the end of the tour. Everyone got a first-hand look. The Atlantic Gelatin was proud of the role they played in the community. They would contribute as individuals and as an organization to the welfare of the Woburn community and surrounding neighbors Stoneham and Winchester. In doing so, they sponsored Little League teams in Woburn and Stoneham and gave out teachers' grants to assist teachers in furthering their education during the summer months. A major shift would occur in October 1955 when Joseph H. Cohen, founder of Atlantic Gelatin and General Foods vice president, retired. The Cohen years were over. All that he built would now be left in the hands of others. He left behind years of success, loyalty, and dedication to the men and women of Atlantic Gelatin, whether they worked in the plant, office, sales, or laboratory. He would never forget their contributions to the growth and success of the jelly for his 36 years. Cohen's successor would be Clement H. Watson, who held the position of general manager from 1955 to 1962. During Watson's years, the Atlantic Gelatin would see the completion of the new lab buildings, which housed the technology and research departments. These research departments would be under the direction of Harold Rosenthal. These departments would play a major role in the development of new products in the years to come. Just as the original owners of Atlantic Gelatin were seeking markets for their tanning byproducts, so too was the new management. The product was grease oil, a byproduct of gelatin making. When blended, it became a high-quality, grade A lubricant used in the textile industry, leather industry, and pharmaceutical industry. The growth of these items by the byproducts department added to their success at this time. The Atlantic Gelatin always kept their spirit of independence and self-reliance, even as a division of General Foods. They made a point of keeping that jelly family spirit by continuing to hold family outings, with tug-of-war contests and old-fashioned pie-eating contests for the kids. The service awards or pin parties would continue, a time employees could come together. These functions would now be held at Hillview Country Club in North Reading. The BEA, or Board of Employee Activities, was formed by employees to promote involvement in social events and issues. Its initial event was the United Fund Appeal. One of their greatest successes were the children's Christmas parties. Rex Trailer and his sidekick Pablo, stars of the Boomtown TV show, would be the hosts and delightfully entertain the Jelly Kids at the Stoneham Town Hall in 1957. Another important group that was very much a part of the Jelly family was the Plant Protection Officers. These men had the important duty of security and fire prevention throughout the plant. You couldn't get by them at the main gate. The whole landscape would drastically change in May 1959 with the construction of the Woburn section of Route I-93. Hill Street would be realigned and houses would be lost. The jelly would no longer be tucked in a quiet section of East Woburn, but was now very visible for all to see as a Woburn landmark. Following Clem Watson as general manager was Richard M. Laster, who would serve for 1 year as interim general manager from 1962 to 1963. He would go on to become executive vice president of General Foods Corporation.
Hey, Barn, look what Aunt Bee just brought by. Lemon meringue pie made out of Jell-o lemon pie filling. Have a piece.
Oh, Andy, you know how the new mayor feels about eating in the office.
But this is smooth, creamy Jell-o lemon pie, easy as you know what to make. Have some.
Well,
Aunt Bee got the recipe off a box of Jell-o lemon pie filling. See, there's recipes on every box.
yeah, well, if that new mayor comes in here, I'm going right under the desk.
Oh, howdy, Mayor. Barn, look at... Try Jell-o pudding and pie filling. A creamy, easy answer to what's for dessert. Good. I appreciate it, and good night.
The beginning of the boom years started with Russell Monblow. During his years as general manager from 1964 to 1979, the jelly would experience increased sales and modernization. He initiated the transfer of the 90-foot tapioca starch tower purchased from the Walter Baker Chocolate Company in Dorchester in 1965. Several of their supervisors would also join the Atlantic Gelatin, such as John Buckley, Art Gaffney, Ray Cox, and Joe Butler. This would bring a new business into Atlantic Gelatin, supplying starch for the General Foods pudding products such as Jell-o pudding and pie fillings. The starch tower would be completed and operations would begin in 1966 and continued until the late 1980s when the tower closed and the starch operation ceased. Another addition was the new balloon warehouse built in 1968 as a storage facility to hold dry animal hides and other raw materials. It was 220 feet long, 60 feet wide, and 35 feet high. Safety in a manufacturing plant is always critical, and while safety standards had always been an essential work component in Atlantic Gelatin, avoiding accidents throughout the plant came to the forefront. Signs and posters were everywhere. Safety in mind leaves accidents behind were constant reminders to the employees. In the 1960s to 1970s, millions of dollars were spent to modernize areas in the plant and the outside grounds. The shipping room would see a new automated bagging machine and palletizer, all to enhance efficiency with the process. Prior to 1972, General Foods completed its new steam generating system that reduced air pollution. This new steam generating system became known as Russell Station. During this time, the Atlantic Gelatin would receive complaints about the smoke going into the atmosphere. People misunderstood the steam for smoke. It was not pollutants, but water vapors from the cooling towers. Many may remember the old steam whistle that was once mounted on the power plant that signaled no school. The whistle came from an old Boston and Maine Railroad steam locomotive, Lily Pond's. Since water was an essential element in the manufacturing process, Atlantic Gelatin was diligent in securing and protecting its water supply. Atlantic Gelatin had its own wells on the property, providing most of the required water, plus it owned Walker's Pond. An underground well line was constructed from this source on Monville Avenue. Although Sweetwater Brook flowed through the property from Stoneham under Route 93, its water was not used. Water needs were supplemented from the MWRA. With the need for greater energy conservation and the soaring price of fuel, it was an ideal time for Atlantic Gelatin to build a co-generator utility plant in 1978. This would give them uninterrupted electricity at an economic rate. Self-generation had arrived at the jelly. Monblow would invest in improving the grounds for all employees to enjoy and visitors to see. He, too, recognized the importance of continuing with formal service award dinners. rewarding employees for their years of hard work and honoring new retirees for their years of loyalty to the jelly. One of the biggest family days came in 1969, when Atlantic Gelatin celebrated its 50th birthday. On this occasion, Montbleau would remind his employees and guests that Atlantic Gelatin was still the largest gelatin plant in the world. To understand the immense scale of their operations, he divulged that Atlantic Gelatin employed 475 people with an annual payroll over $4 million. Over $10 million were spent on raw materials and services to produce enough gelatin to provide every man, woman, and child in the city of Woburn with over 600 servings of Jell-o per day, and their operations consumed enough water every day to supply a city of over 50,000 people. Many millions of pounds of raw materials were needed every year to produce 20 million pounds of gelatin. To produce that quantity of gelatin would require a trainload of refrigerated rail cars full of edible frozen pig skins stretching over 18 miles. The dry tannery hides being shipped from outside the United States required over 100 ships each year, and domestic hide trimmings required 10 miles of trucks. This was the jelly legacy in 1969 under Russ Montbleau. The Atlantic Gelatin Company remained a major employer in Woburn, and in 1965 it was Woburn's second largest taxpayer. Upon Montbleau's retirement, he would turn the leadership over to Gerald M. Wiseman, who would serve as general manager from 1979 to 1996. He would see the spray drying business expand in 1980 with the construction of one of the largest facilities of its kind in the world, the Atlantic Towers. 2 additional spray towers were installed to accommodate the growing portfolio of flavor ingredients required by General Food products such as Jell-o gelatin, Kool-Aid drink mix, Post Fruity Pebbles, Jet Puffed Marshmallows, Trolley Gummy Candy, and Crystal Light beverages. The process for making these flavors was the mixing of a fixation compound and flavoring oils into fine particles, which were then pumped under very high pressure to the top of the tower, where they were then sprayed into the unit as a fine mist. The moisture was removed, and a fine powder collects to the bottom. The flavor product was then drummed and sent to the various General Food plants. The Atlantic Gelatin was always looking for technological improvements. In 1983, a $1 million ultrafiltration processing system for removing water and salts from the gelatin, a process that replaces energy-intense evaporators, was installed. This filtration system produced a higher concentration of gelatin, a new way of producing something faster and at a less cost, using less energy. Wiseman would face an economic climate change for the jelly. There was greater competition. There were 6 other domestic gelatin manufacturers all competing for supply of raw materials. Atlantic Gelatin was also competing head-on with gelatin imports from nations that enter the U.S. duty-free. Jerry Wiseman felt strongly that Atlantic Gelatin could compete because it had 4 major strengths: quality, reliability, innovation, and continuity, which translated into dedication and staying power in supplying quality gelatin to General Foods in the open market. He would be the torchbearer of this message even while another corporate ownership change would occur in 1985, when General Foods was acquired by Philip Morris Companies for $5.7 billion. In 1988, Philip Morris bought Kraft Incorporated, and it merged the 2 food companies in 1990 to become Kraft General Foods. In 1992, the Jelly family would have a small part in a special event with employee Dan Kerrigan, who was a welder in the maintenance department. His daughter Nancy participated in the 1992 Winter Olympics. To show support, the Jelly employees raised funds as a gift to the Kerrigan family to enjoy while attending the Olympics. Nancy would go on to win the silver medal in figure skating. In 1996, Kathleen Pigott began her tenure as general manager. Besides the responsibility for managing all plant operations, she would need to use her public relations skills during those years. The plant that began in 1919 in rural Woburn was now surrounded by neighbors. Complaints of odors, air contamination, and waste disposal were delivered loud and clear. While each complaint did not rise to catastrophic levels, many did impact neighborhood quality of life, and each one garnered publicity. This community still felt the pain of Woburn water contamination of earlier years and would not allow a repeat of this catastrophe, so every concern was publicly raised. Atlantic Gelatin faced each issue head-on. A 24-hour community hotline was set up. Recognizing that the main sources of odors came from the oil and fat byproducts and the spray drying and blending of fruit flavors, an odor control management program was introduced. Atlantic Gelatin upgraded their odor control equipment as well as their air pollution control equipment called scrubbers. They handled disposal of byproducts from gelatin manufacturing by recycling off-site. Atlantic Gelatin was still an industry leader, producing many gelatin products for General Foods. A positive and optimistic outlook still remained at the plant. With Kathleen Pigott, social activities continued, and a momentous birthday occurred in 1997.
I hope you made a special dessert for our anniversary.
I didn't make dessert, Dad. Oh? Instead, I made some fun.
Watch it flavor, see it shiver, cool, fruity flavor, Jell-o. Jell-o tastes great, of all desserts you'll love the one that tastes so good and makes such fun. Make Jell-o dessert and make some fun.
You sure taught me how to make fun.
In 1997, the Jell-o brand celebrated its 100th birthday, and proudly Atlantic Gelatin had supplied 100% of the gelatin for 78 of those years. The Jell-o brand was owned by Orator F. Woodward, owner of Genesee Pure Foods of Leroy, New York. He bought the formula in name from P.B. Waite of the same town in 1899 for $450. Waite was experimenting with gelatin in his home and came up with a fruit-flavored dessert his wife would name Jell-o. The 4 original flavors were orange, lemon, strawberry, and raspberry, with lime being introduced in 1930. Jell-o's success can be attributed to great marketing, such as posters and magazine ads in the Ladies' Home Journal. In 1934, General Foods was one of the first to advertise on radio with Jack Benny. Pudding mixes were introduced in 1936. Jell-o would become so successful, nearly every household in America had a favorite Jell-o recipe by the 1960s. In 1964, the popular slogan, "There's always room for Jell-o," was introduced. Another new product that was a hit was the Jell-o frozen pudding pops in the 1980s. The Atlantic Gelatin would honor this occasion with a picnic and family outing for employees. It was a time to remind everyone that the success of Jell-o would not have happened if not for the 78 years of hard work from the men and women at the jelly. In 2006, Dennis Gordon would lead Atlantic Gelatin for 3 years until Jane Hoyt arrived. Unfortunately for Hoyt, the signs may have been there that a change was coming. She would get notification in 2014 that the jelly would be closing in 2016. Hoyt would first oversee the closing of the gelatin plant and then the flavor towers. With the merger of Kraft Foods Group and Heinz in July of 2015, the new company name would be Kraft Heinz, and the closing became official. There are many reasons for the closing, but with competition from abroad with cheaper costs and lower production levels, this made the closing the necessary business decision. In his statement on the closing, Steve Yucknut, Vice President of Integrated Supply Chain for Kraft's Meals and Dessert Business Unit, said the following: "Closing the Woburn facility is difficult for us, but in looking at our operations holistically, we don't think that long-term investments in this facility make strategic sense for our network. We know external vendors already have the upgraded technology and optimized logistics to drive significant costs efficiently. Yucknut added, "This is not a reflection on our employees in Woburn. This is a business decision that has nothing to do with their performance, which has been excellent. We are committed to treating our employees with respect and dignity and will be working with them through this transition." Joseph Cohen had the view in 1954 when he stated, "Atlantic Gelatin is as good for Woburn, Stoneham, and Winchester, and other neighboring communities as those communities are for Atlantic Gelatin." This sentiment remained for 97 years. At one time, the Atlantic Gelatin Company was the largest gelatin manufacturer in the world. A good year produced 18 million pounds of gelatin. A great year produced 22 million pounds. In 2015, its last year of production, the company produced approximately 12 to 14 million pounds. Like so many other manufactured products, gelatin can now be produced elsewhere in the world at a lower cost. While the plant, its buildings, and land will eventually be replaced and new development will occupy the area, the Friends of Woburn veterans, under the direction of Larry Giuseppe, ensured that the memory of the Atlantic Gelatin Company would have a permanent historic place. The World War II memorial that had been on the grounds of the company since 1948 was moved to a green space opposite the Goodyear School and was rededicated as Jelly Square in June 2016, with family members and former employees in attendance. The Atlantic Gelatin Company closed its doors forever in April 2016, but the memory of Atlantic Gelatin will remain in the hearts and minds of thousands of hard-working men and women who will proudly say, "I worked at the Jelly."